All right, welcome. I have come up with a new way to take care of yarn tails, so I wanted to quickly show you. When I talk about yarn tails, is what I'm referring to is actually that starter yarn tail when you're starting a new project that you often have to deal with. For example, socks. If you started your sock, this is a cuff down sock, this is the ribbing. When you started your sock, you've just started it and you left the tail and you just kept working around towards the heel and the toe. And then after, when it's off the machine, then you have to kind of sew that in. And I was thinking recently, that's frustrating. Why? Why not just do it on the machine? There's got to be an easier way. So then I thought on it, and actually I came up with something last night. So I'm going to show you this today. So let's take care of this yarn tail while we're doing our project so we don't have this extra work to do later. All right, so we'll put that away. All right, so you're looking at a machine. This is a Laguerre. It has a 72 needle slot, has a yarn carrier, very straightforward. It doesn't matter what machine you can do this on, any machine, actually even any machine with or without a slotted yarn carrier. So you have your project, rather you have your scrap. You've decided maybe that you want to change to your project yarn, maybe at this mark that I've got here, and that meant the next needle after this needle here will be your project yarn. So as you always would do, is you'd want to make sure the last needle before your mark has a stitch. The latch is mostly closed so nothing will drop. There we go. And so now we'd cut our scrap from the source and we would unthread it from our yarn carrier, very straightforward. And as this needle is our last needle that we knitted with, and we would want to definitely make sure that nothing is going to drop. Okay, so there we go. All right. So normally, when we are looking at this needle as our first project yarn on whatever project, we would simply take our sock yarn, which is handily threaded above, and we would just kind of hold the tail into the inside of the cylinder. We'd pinch it. I love to clip it. And then what we would do is we would just thread the yarn carrier and then redirect the yarn. Some people do redirect the yarn to cover the needle before. I do not. Some people just, so the first needle after the mark would be, is that right? Yeah. First needle after that mark would definitely be making this first stitch. So that would be my first needle. That's how most people seem to do their projects, how they start. And then when the project's off the machine, they have to deal with that yarn tail, which is okay if that works for you, but why the extra work? Let's try something different. All right, so what I propose is this new technique. So instead of doing it as I just showed, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our yarn and just simply find the tail and about 2 to 3 inches from the end, just fold it over, okay? Fold that guy over. And so on the fold over, we are taking the needle before the one we start and anchoring the fold over on it. So there we go. Now we have our folded over and our yarn tail and then our source yarn that's going to the machine or to the source. So now what I want you to do is you pinch the yarn tail and your source and thread your yarn carrier with it. So you have your anchor. Both feeds are going into this first needle and then into your yarn carrier. And just hold it. There we go. Now you can make this as long as you want. I'm a big fan of at least 5 needles because this item is going to be washed and you want it not to undo because that's not fun. All right, so what you can do at this point is if you want a longer tail, you're like, oh no, I want a longer one, just kind of feed it through. So there we go. So just so you have control, just continue pinching it here. And now we are going to slowly work forward. Of course, always making sure your latches are open, just working forward. Of course, there is weight on your scrap still, so this is why everything is down and working correctly. So just slowly go forward. Technically, that's a whole lot of needles. 1, 2, 3, 4, that's technically 5. So at this point, I can just gently hang on to it and let it go forward. Good. And there we go. I wanted to show you before I did a complete row what is happening here. So this is the anchor. This was my first stitch. And what we're going to do is we're going to simply continue knitting our first row, and I'll show you what it looks like. There we go. Keeping in mind what you're seeing here, of course, is every second needle threaded because it's set up for ribbing very soon. And that's why there's these big spaces. So if it were me, I'd probably have gone further if I was doing like a mock rib sock or something, just because overkill is better than underdoing it. So 1, 2, well, that was about 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. All right, good. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slowly, while you can see, go forward. Perfect. And we're going to, can we zoom even further? No, I guess that's it. So what you see here then is there will be no extra yarn tail to have to deal with. It's already kind of worked into the machine, which is awesome. So then you're saying, well, no, that's a yarn tail. You have to deal with that. Well, actually, because you have all these securing stitches, when it's off the machine, you could snip that if you choose. Of course, why not? So here's just an example of my rib sock that I did this with. Here we go. I haven't snipped the end yet, but can you see where I did my anchor and fed it through? Probably over here somewhere. Certainly, I feel this is a much nicer way of integrating the yarn tail without any off-machine extra work. So I would trim that, and I'd pretend some store made it. No, definitely I would say I made it. But you can see how very professional that looks. And I don't doubt that your threading in of your yarn tails looks professional, but mine don't. But now they do. So showing you this in this format first is just a way to clearly show you what's going on. Now what we'll do is I'll set up for ribbing, and I'll review everything with that in place. Just another quick note though, whenever you have a yarn tail of your scrap, it's not a bad idea if it's going to be hanging where you can't see it. It's so rarely going to be on the inside where you can see it, like in this demo. But if you had, for example, a yarn tail and it was fed into the machine behind your work and between the cylinder and your work, which is where it would normally be, it's not a bad idea to add a clip. So you know for sure with a little bit of weight, it's hanging down and out of the way of everything. So I'm just going to show you a quick idea of what that clip will look like that you can't see when it's inside the machine. So I'm just going to show you in this instance so you know what's happening underneath. So I like to use hemostats. This is a hemostat. This is 2.5 inch clippable locking kind of thing. I love these. But what you can use is pretty much anything with a bit of weight. So even a wooden clothespin would be perfect. A lot of flatbed users use them. So they'll have the yarn tail inside the machine, and they'll just simply clip it and let it hang. Bad example because you can see it's just resting there, but if it was underneath, it would be hanging and it would be out of the way. I show you this now because when I switch to the ribber, I'm not going to be able to show you everything, and that's what I do when I clip it. So let's pause this and set it up for ribbing. Okay, so we're back. This is my Laguerre set up by a 1x1 rib, 1 knit, 1 purl, with my ribber arm, tappet, and ribber dial. And this is orange scrap yarn. And we normally start a sock generally at the 3 o'clock position. This is what this is here. So this first horizontal needle you see that I'm touching is the first needle after 3 o'clock. And this is where I generally would want to start my first stitch of my project. So what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate what I just showed you, but in real life. Although, of course, this procedure, this method can be used on any project that has a yarn tail, and which project doesn't. And it can be started with the anchor with the needle before or on the needle that you are starting with. In this instance, with a cylinder needle before and a ribber needle for my first one, I choose to start my anchor on the needle before. But it truly doesn't matter one way or the other. You could do both, one or the other, as an option. All right, so in this example, normally we would cut the orange scrap and we would feed our sock yarn, or rather we would tie the sock yarn to the cut portion on your yarn source. So I would take my scrap, I would cut it here, and I would take my sock yarn and I would join the tails, and then I would pull on this and the scrap would pull the sock yarn until here. I would pull it into place, and then you would see the join. And that point, what I would do normally is I would take something really long, like this hook that you see here, come up from under the machine and pull that scrap yarn and sock yarn through, and I would just start knitting. Off the machine, I would separate the scrap from the sock yarn, and then I would have a yarn tail to deal with. And again, that yarn tail would look like this. So let's start this method to deal with it much easier on the machine. So this is what we're going to do. If you want to know further the other way of working a sock, or to do any sock, cuff down or toe up, ribbed or mock ribbed, please see my site, www.csmlove.com, and that can tell you on the My Sock Videos page written patterns and videos that match. Anyways, let's proceed. What we're going to do here is we're going to follow pretty much the same few steps as we would normally. I'm cutting the scrap yarn at the source. There it is, cut. I'm taking my sock yarn and I'm tying a knot on the scrap tail that you can't see because it's off the screen. And what I'm going to do here is I am just taking my scrap yarn off my yarn carrier. I'm watching that I don't do what I just did, which is to that needle before doesn't lose its stitch and then drop. So all I've done is I've pulled overhead on my join that happened at the yarn source, so I do not have to rethread the top part. And we're going to look here. So now that we have this, see, normally I would reach up inside the machine with that hook and I would pull all of this fiber into the machine so that we would see this would be our first, and we would thread the machine and just start knitting, and that would make our sock as the beginning part, the selvage. But what we're going to do is we're going to do that same method I just showed you with anchoring the yarn tail. So now that we have full access to our scrap and our project yarn tail, we're going to undo that knot. So here we go. Very easy. There we go. Got two pieces now. I want to do two things. One, I want to manage this scrap yarn by actually putting it on the inside of the machine and using a clip that I mentioned in the previous segment. So what is the same now as it was before is I'm going to use that hook, latch, use whatever you can and what you will. And you actually get very proficient at it the more you do it. But let's just see if I can zoom in and show you what I'm doing. So I'm going to take this hook, and on the inside wall of the cylinder, I'm going to come up just after the 3 o'clock position between this vertical cylinder and this horizontal rubber needle. So I'm going to come up right between. So let's do that. The more you do it, the easier it is. I'm almost there. There we are. See, it wasn't all that hard. See me? There I am. Hello. All right. So I'm just going to catch the scrap. There we go. And I just want to drag it down between the knitting, the needles, and I'm just pulling all the way down. So now the scrap is inside under the machine that you can't see. And I mentioned clipping the yarn tail so it doesn't get caught on anything. Just take your scrap and your clip of choice. Here, mine is the hemostat. And I've clipped it. And that's just going to allow it to, with a little bit of weight, just remain hanging. So you might be seeing it here. Always make sure all your latches are behaving. So I've confirmed that I'm pointing to this previous needle has got the scrap yarn and that latch is closed, which is good. And again, this is where we're going to start. This is my horizontal rubber needle waiting to be fed sock yarn. From the end, fold it over for your anchor. So there's my anchor and there's my yarn tail. So what I'm going to do is the same thing I did a moment ago, is I want this anchor to sit on the needle before, which in this scenario is this cylinder needle. You can see that I've got it there. See that I got it there? Yeah. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to thread the yarn carrier. So as you can see, is I have double thickness of yarn, of course, because I'm holding the yarn tail as well. And you can see here I'm anchored, and my first stitch is this horizontal first rubber needle. The latch is open, and everything is ready to knit. So I'm just going to gently hold the yarn tail and the source yarn and gently go forward, watching to make sure each latch is behaving, at least the first couple. It is, yeah, there we go. There we go. And of course you can make a yarn tail as long as you wish. I prefer to do at least 5 needles worth. Looks like I did at least that. It's from here to here. And there's my yarn tail. I don't care. I'll just keep going. There you are. So basically my yarn tail has been from here to pretty much here. It's not coming undone. All right, so now we could begin the salvage of our sock if we choose to do whatever salvage we choose to do. That is certainly taken care of. The salvage I like to do more often than not is the ribbing for 1 row, 2 rows of knitting, and then back to ribbing for the rest of your cuff. So if this is our first row, we would stop here, the 4 needles, 4 horizontal rubber needles from the end of the row. And then I would take it out of work. And we're going to work 1 row of knitting. Again, 2 row of knitting, stopping 4 horizontal needles short of my 3 o'clock. Back into work, and now I'd finish my cuff. So that is it. That is the method. And there you are. Watch for soon a new version of my cuff down sock showing this and a few other quick tips. Thank you so much.